Hello, I'm Rebecca World, Director of Yukon Government's Climate Change Secretariat. I've had the privilege of attending a number of international climate change negotiations as a representative of the Yukon Government. Today, I'm going to talk about the negotiations as an example of climate change treaties and agreements that work to gain multi-country momentum on this important issue. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, hosts annual meetings with almost all the countries in the world to discuss agreements on climate action. Member states, called parties, meet at this Conference of the Parties, or COP, with the aim of preventing dangerous human interference with the climate system. To date, 194 countries have signed on to the convention, showing near universal agreement on the importance of responding to climate change at the international level. Although the process is often criticized for being incredibly slow due to its consensus-based decision process, the UNFCCC remains the only international venue for addressing climate change in a legally binding manner. The annual Conference of the Parties, COP, attracts tens of thousands of participants from various levels of government, business, academia, non-governmental organizations to advance negotiations and share experiences related to climate change adaptation and mitigation. There are many COP milestones, but I'll briefly introduce you to three central markers that illustrate the evolution of the convention. You've likely heard of some of them. In 1992, the first United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was held. The convention itself came into force in 1994. A major principle was common but differentiated responsibilities, whereby developed countries committed to assist developing countries with finance, technology, and capacity building. The Kyoto Protocol of 1997 established binding emissions targets and timetables for developed countries only. The protocol's first commitment period started in 2008 and ended in 2012. The second commitment period began on January 1, 2013 and will end in 2020. The central aim of the 2015 Paris Agreement is to strengthen the global response to the threat of climate change by keeping a global temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius, with efforts to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The agreement also aims to strengthen the ability of countries to deal with the impacts of climate change. So what does all this mean for Canada? Leading up to the 2015 Paris Agreement, parties submitted nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. In early 2015, Canada committed to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. In efforts to coordinate domestically to reach Canada's international target, premiers met in March 2016 and committed to the Vancouver Declaration. The Vancouver Declaration led to the release of the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change in December 2016. Included in the framework are commitments like all provinces and jurisdictions will implement a carbon price by 2018. The floor price will be $10 a ton in 2018, rising by $10 each year to $50 a ton by 2022. And 90% of Canada's electricity will come from non-emitting sources by 2030, with specific reference to a coal phase-out. The idea is that these commitments and more will lead Canada to achieving its targets. So you've seen a little about how the international climate change negotiations operate and how they can drive domestic change in a Canadian context. Perhaps the question still remains, why does Yukon attend the international negotiations? I'll outline three main reasons. Number one, we bring the territory's values, circumstances, and ideas into national and international discussions and decisions about climate change. The North is unique, and it's important that Canada's negotiators are reminded of what it means to live in the North. Adaptation is important to us because we are living the changes wrought by climate change, very similar to many small island and developing nations. We are an emerging economy and at times experience significant socioeconomic challenges. We are strong and resilient, and yet often need attention that's a little different from the needs that emerge in southern Canada. Yukon attends to ensure these needs are communicated and met. Number 2, we attend so that we can learn, network, and share best practices as part of these global efforts to take effective actions for mitigation and adaptation to climate change. COP is an incredible opportunity to take advantage of the very high concentration of climate change experts in one place. World-renowned scientists, policymakers, communicators, educators, and more converge at this event and offer presentations and opportunities for follow-up discussions. Number 3, we established the Youth Ambassador Program as part of our recognition that we need to address climate change now and well into the future. By inviting a Yukon youth aged 19 to 23 to COP, Yukon government is able to introduce an emerging leader to the world of diplomacy, communication skills, and climate change science and policy in a context that allows for significant and meaningful dialogue and lasting impact. No one country and no one industry alone is the cause or the solution to climate change. We are all responsible. China, the European Union, and the United States, for example, make up less than half of the world's emissions, and so we cannot point to one or even a handful of entities and say, over there is where we need to focus our attention, not us. No. Everybody must take action on important mitigation and adaptation measures. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change process is a mechanism to coordinate and enable climate action across all countries to ensure we are all playing our part. The UNFCCC commitments drive country commitments. We have seen firsthand through the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change how these international events can provide a mechanism for coordinating action domestically. Yukon has a role to play. How are you taking action on climate change?